Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. What's good? You know the vibes. Jon Jeune here at the real Jon J_FF, and welcome back to another live episode of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It's week 11, and we're officially in that stretch of the season where every game matters. We've been there. Every game has mattered. Every game is always going to matter, but they matter a little bit more now with just 4 weeks left in the regular season. So whether you're pushing for playoff seeding or fighting to stay in the hunt, these next few weeks can make or break your season. So this is where we really got to lock in, y'all. Really got to lock in. So we've got the Colts and the Saints on bye, some key injuries to monitor across the league, and a bunch of matchups that could swing fantasy outcomes in a big way. So this morning, I'm breaking down every game on Week 11 slate, and we're gonna find out which matchups will be targeting this week. Who are my starts of the week this week, so we can help you set those lineups with some confidence heading into Sunday. Before we get into it, make sure you check the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Patreon, FFDX, patreon.com/FFDX. You can join for free to access the FFDX cheat sheet or become an FFDX supporter for just $1 a month. Actually, it's not even going to cost you that to become an FFDX supporter, because right now we are running a promotion, a special offer from now through the end of Thanksgiving weekend. Every member of the FFDX Patreon gets access to everything that anyone in the FFDX supporter tier would get access to, right? So that means the weekly waiver wire article that drops on Monday night, the expanded rankings, the Sunday morning or Sunday noon Q&A, where I answer all any of your start sit questions, but any question you have really for that matter, right? Whether, trade deadline is looming, so you got trade ideas, you want to bounce them off of me, sure, by all means. You got a start sit decision you got to make with some last minute inactives or things of that nature. By all means, you want to ask a betting question, life question, whatever it is, right? In that 30 minutes, 30 minutes, give or take, I will be willing to answer any question you guys ask. So, right now, special promotion all the way through Thanksgiving weekend, not going to cost you that $1 a month, even though I will argue it's still the best value that you can have in fantasy right now, but absolutely free for everybody. So go ahead, patreon.com/FFDX, and make sure you join, and you get to experience all of that if you're not a member already. All right, chat, dive in. Let me know where you're coming from, and let's get into the Week 11 matchup show. So first off, for my podcast listeners, I apologize, and only the ones that listen to the podcast or know what I'm apologizing for right now. When I was posting a matchup, the waiver show for Week 11, I realized that the Week 10 matchup show never got pushed out. It was just sitting in drafts. And so I apologize for that. I did end up putting it out when I realized, but obviously that by that point it's been too late. It wasn't going to help anybody with Week 10. So I definitely want to apologize to my podcast listeners. I'll definitely make sure that doesn't happen again. But if if for whatever reason something like that does happen, or you can't see it, it's a great opportunity to go over to the YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube, and make sure that you don't miss any of the episodes when they drop. So, all right. So, the matchup show, right? If you know, we look at quarterbacks and tight ends inside or outside that top 10, running backs, wide receivers inside or outside that top 20, right? Last week, how did we do? We gave out 12 recommendations last week, and it was just it was an okay week. right? It wasn't terrible. It wasn't, I thought it was a pretty solid week, honestly. But it was split down the middle in terms of big hits versus big misses or hits versus misses, right? So we categorize anything, a big hit is anything of beating their ECR by 10 spots or more. Big miss would be the reverse of that, missing their ECR by 10 spots or more. A hit would be just beating their ECR outright, and then a miss would be just missing their ECR outright. So the big misses: Sam Darnold at quarterback, 4.9 fantasy points. All right, we talked about that. Had kind of a weird game there, where had two defensive touchdowns, had three turnovers himself. So just didn't lead to a ton of fantasy production for him. So he finished as the quarterback 26. Then we had Darnell Mooney. What a big whiff and a miss. I don't think I'm ever going to talk about Darnell Mooney on this show again. I was going to say for the rest of the year, but we'll see how much the recency bias affects me next year. But 2.7 PPR points in Germany. Um, the wide receiver 75 on the week. Yeah, yeah. Then there was Tedoroy McMillan, 11 PPR points, finished as the wide receiver 33 after being ranked the wide receiver 23. So, again, the peripherals have been looking so good for Tedoroy McMillan basically every week. So, I'm not gonna lie, guys. I'm probably gonna keep playing. I'm gonna keep rolling them out there. Where I have them, but I can admit it has been a bit underwhelming here with Tedoroy McMillan. All right, now in terms of the misses, right? We had Harold Fannin as the tight ends. He finishes the tight end 17 after being ranked 11, had 8.4 PPR points. So didn't absolutely kill you. Obviously for playing tight end. Um, you know, he had 8.4 PPR points, but Njoku, his teammate, who we did call out as a play, if Harold Fannin was limited, couldn't go. If you didn't feel comfortable going with him in that same matchup, he scored 10.1 PPR points and he finishes a tight end 11. You want to know why? Because he scored a touchdown. Because that's what happens when you play tight end. Anyway, LA Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston finishes the wide receiver 38 after being ranked 29, finished with 9.2 PPR points. And then Christian Watson finishes the wide receiver 48, 6.5 PPR points on the week. In terms of the big hits, right, we had Dalton Schultz finished as the tight end 4, right, 18.3 PPR points. Kate Otten finishes the tight end 6, 17.2 PPR points. Did I say we had 3 big hits? Looks like we had 4 big hits. Darius Slayton finishes the wide receiver 26 after being ranked 41, 12.9 PPR points, and Juwan Jennings finishes the wide receiver 16 after being ranked 30, 17.1 PPR points. And then in terms of hits, Marcus Mariota, 18.7 PPR points, finishes the quarterback 12. Mark Andrews, 10.4 PPR points, finishes the tight end 9. And then Khalil Shakir, 12.8 PPR points, finishes the wide receiver 28. So again, I thought it was a solid week all in all. The big misses that killed you, Darnold, Mooney, those killed you. Tedoroy McMillan, I don't know if he killed you. 11 PPR points. I think he'll still take that. And then the misses, Christian Watson, Quentin Johnston. Those two, I think their production was very mid. But yeah, that is all we got for the recap. Now let's jump into the games, right? So first off, we've got the Washington Commanders. I think this game is in Spain, actually. And they're taking on the Miami Dolphins. So in this game, I'm actually interested in Miami quarterback Tua Tagovailoa here. Um, he's the ECR quarterback 21 according to the expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros, and Tua is finished as a QB1 just twice all year. Right, he's currently ranked as the quarterback 20 on the year, but this matchup here. is a good one. Washington has allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. On the year, though, only 2 times has an opposing quarterback scored less than 18 fantasy points against the Washington Commanders. They've allowed the last 5 quarterbacks they faced to score at least 19.8 fantasy points. So Tua, again, has not been great all year, has not been someone that we wanted to rely on from a fantasy perspective. But when you look at what he's facing in this Washington Commanders defense, I think you feel really good about that, right? I think as a whole, you feel really good about this Miami offense, right? Against this Washington defense, right? If I were to just pull up the cheat sheet here, Washington, second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, fourth most to opposing running backs over the last 3 games, most to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games, and most to tight ends, or sixth most to tight ends over their last 3 games. So Washington is a great spot here defensively, to target for our fantasy teams. So I'm all in on Tua. I love Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle this week. Both were candidates for me for start of the week. I did choose one of them, though, so I'll have to stick around for that. And then, even Greg Dulcich, right? We talked about him in the waiver show. If you want to get a little nasty, you got a guy that is the route participation has been trending up. So you got a game here against the Washington Commanders where I think anybody in this Miami Dolphins can eat on this Miami Dolphins offense can eat. So feel really good about that. On the Washington side, Miami's defense, they've played a little better in recent weeks, right? To the point where they're trending as a tougher matchup for opposing running backs and wide receivers. 28th against opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games, 21st against running backs over their last 3 games. 14th against quarterbacks, which actually that trended in the opposite, in the better direction for us. But they, third best matchup for opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. So when I look at that, Marcus Mariota definitely in play from that perspective. I'm going back and forth quite a bit on who I'd rather play between Tua and Marcus Mariota. And the more, I think about it, the more I was digging into it last night, right? If you go over to the Patreon, you'll see my top 20 quarterbacks. And, I definitely don't have Tua in the top 20, but I have Mariota in that top 20. As I was working on this last night and going through, my prep for the show, I really talked myself into Tua a little bit more, right? I think, he probably has the higher ceiling in the matchup. He's had the lower floor. Mariota probably has the higher floor, but maybe not as high as his ceiling here, right? Because of his rushing upside, I think that's why he has such a high floor. But being a road dog. I mean, they're both on the road here. Not really many weapons, and Miami's defense playing much better. It just makes you wonder how much the upside is going to be capped. In terms of the rushing attack for Washington, Chris Rodriguez Jr. He stepped up last week, the last 2 weeks actually, in terms of the workload here. So I think Bill Krosky Merritt is basically unplayable right now. And I need him to show us something before we can start sticking him in the lineup. But yeah, definitely something to monitor as we move forward. Let's move on to this next matchup here. We've got that's the wrong matchup. No, that's the right matchup. Sorry. We've got the Tennessee Titans hosting the Houston Texans here. The total sits here at 39.5, and the Texans are 7.5-point road favorites here. I'm going to go with Houston running back Woody Marks. He scored double-digit PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games. Last week, he saw a 73.7% running back rush share. saw a bulk of the work early before the game even got out of hand for Houston, right? Houston had to make that big comeback in the fourth quarter. But Woody Marks was on the field, very early on in the first quarter. So I'm expecting Marks to continue his backfield takeover in a matchup against Tennessee defense that's allowed the eighth most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last three games here. Um, CJ Stroud, not expected, or not expected. He has already been ruled out of this game, right? So he's not going to play. So Davis Mills gets another start here for the Houston Texans. I think he's in another good spot here. Tennessee's allowed the sixth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last three games. I feel good about Nico Collins in this game here as well. Fifth most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers over their last three games. Houston has allowed. Dalton Schultz, he's dealing with a shoulder injury. So if he misses this game, that would kind of be a bummer because he was a guy that we were targeting as a tight end streamer. But, I think there's actually some pretty decent options at the tight end position this week. And there are some pretty solid pivots, I think, right? So, and then on the Tennessee side, I don't know if there's anyone I want to play, right? Like Calvin Ridley, he's coming back. This Houston defense is really good. Just statistically, they're one of the better defenses, but even fantasy wise, 20th most points against quarterbacks, 22nd against running backs, 27th against wide receivers, 24th against tight ends over the last three games. So I'm not really looking to play any of the many of the Houston pieces. Tony Pollard, or I should say Tajay Spears, right? I think based on game script, Tajay Spears probably is the better play here out of the Tennessee running backs. But that's it, really. Calvin Ridley, he's coming back, or he did return to practice, so makes you wonder how the receiver rotation will shuffle. But again, not looking or excited to play any of those guys in this matchup here. All right, moving on in the next matchup, we've got the Buffalo Bills taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This game sits at 49.5 point total. And the Buccaneers are 5.5 point road dogs here. I'm going to go with an oldie but a goodie. Let's go Buffalo wide receiver Khalil Shakir. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 27. Shakir has seen at least 5 targets in each of his last 6 games, including no less than 7 over his last 3 games. And he's well ahead in targets over the last 3 games with 24, which is 10 more than the next Bills skill position player. And now that Kincaid is out, he's about to take on a Tampa Bay defense that has allowed the 7th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. Right? Shakir, he's the steady constant here for Josh Allen, right? Whether it's injury like Dalton Kincaid or effectiveness or, like Keon Coleman, or injury like Josh Palmer. Shakir has been the constant there. He's earned the trust of Josh Allen over, the last year or so. So Shakir, I think in a solid spot here, to not just because of the matchup, but I think also because of the volume that he'll see, over these, in this matchup here against Tampa Bay. On the Tampa Bay side, obviously you're gonna start your, Emeka Ibuka, Bucky Irving. He's trying to do his darndest to get on the good side of us fantasy managers here. But no, in all seriousness, return to practice on a limited capacity, which I think is great news. Don't think he plays this week, but the fact that he's practicing, I think, is promising for next week. So that being said, I think Rachaad White, I think you still play him. I know there's all this stuff about Sean Tucker, but I need to see. I feel like I need to see it again. In order for me to feel confident playing Sean Tucker. Unfortunately, I don't think if Bucky Irving plays, I don't think we'll get that opportunity to see it again. But if you're in a pinch, I could understand somebody wanting to play Sean Tucker in this game. On the Bills side, you're just going to play your usual suspects, right? Obviously, Khalil Shakir, like I said, Josh Allen, And then James Cook. I know people are wondering, can you go with Dawson Knox with Dalton Kincaid out? I mean, you could, but I feel like you'd be banking on a touchdown. Tampa Bay has only allowed the 27th most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. So, no, not the best spot. I do like Cade Otton. Although, again, I guess this seems a little hypocritical. Buffalo 26th most PPR points against opposing tight ends. It almost just feels like Cade Otton, though the route participation, the usage over the last 3 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised to see him continue to have another good game here. Buffalo 16th most PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers. So Emeka Ibuka, I think Tez Johnson's in play, just given the game environment. Curious to see how Baker Mayfield turns out in this one. I initially didn't have him ranked that high in my initial projections, but when I was doing my rankings, I did stick him into my top 12. All right, projections are you're projecting the mean outcome, where rankings account for range of outcomes, right? So while he was low in my projections, I did have him higher in the rankings. But it does make me, give me a little bit of trepidation. I actually almost put him down here as somebody that we would sit, but just given the game environment, against Buffalo, high scoring game, 49.5 point total, what this game means for both teams coming off of a loss. So they feel really desperate to get a win, I think, at this point. I just wouldn't be surprised if Baker just pulls a rabbit out of his hat in this one. KJ, what's up, man? KJ saying, good morning. In a super flex league, would you start Baker or Davis Mills? Wow. Had Drake May for this other quarterback last night. Wow. That's so on cue with the question, KJ. Yeah, I was literally just talking about how Baker Mayfield didn't have him high in the rankings, or in the projections, but I had him higher in the rankings. And would you believe who was the inverse of that, which was Davis Mills, who I had high in the projections, but didn't rank him as high. So let me just look at some things, right? Like when I look at, we just talked again about Davis Mills a little bit, right? So when I look at the matchup, Tennessee, it's a fantastic matchup, right? The 6th most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. While Buffalo sits here at 31st. Yeah, this one's a tough one, man. It's tougher than it might sound, right? Um, I think the question I ask myself, right, is what is my opponent's matchup looking like, right? Also, am I stacking, right? I think I would take all those into account, right? Like if my opponent is starting Nico Collins, would it then make sense for me to start Davis Mills? Or if I'm starting Nico Collins, does it make sense for me to start Davis Mills, right? I think those are the things I would start thinking about. Am I a favorite? Am I projected to get blown out? So do I need upside, right? Because then stacking is in my favor. Um, if I'm an underdog, but they have Nico Collins, then I'd feel better about playing I feel better about playing a Davis Mills, right? Or if I'm favored, I don't really need a whole ton of upside, right? I've got an Emeka Ibuka, and maybe I want to hedge a little bit, right? Like, and not play Baker. I'll play Emeka Ibuka, but I'll play Davis Mills, right? Or the vice versa of that, right? So to answer your question, I'm just gonna say, yeah, we'll play Davis Mills. We'll play Davis Mills, KJ. That's just gonna sound crazy, but I'm looking at it's like all green here for Tennessee, where the Buffalo game, not so much. Higher implied team total. Houston actually has a higher implied team total than Tampa Bay does, right? Tampa Bay sits here at an implied team total of 22 points. Houston sits here at an implied team total of 24 points, right? Both teams on the road. Is there any weather concerns in this game? Let me just check that too. Thought I had that. Okay, I'll just have to pull it up. KJ bringing the heat at 7:27 in the morning. Let's check this last piece of information regarding weather. Yeah, Houston, Tennessee is good. Oh, yeah, there's some wind in the Tampa Bay Buffalo game too. Look at that. Yeah, I cements my answer, KJ. We're going with Davis Mills. All right. Let's move on to the next game here. Let's talk the Minnesota Vikings against the Chicago Bears here. We've got Minnesota at home here, hosting the Chicago Bears, our division rivals. The game sits here as a 47.5-point total. The Minnesota Vikings are 3-point favorites here. I don't know who needs to be convinced. I mean, I guess when I go through this, we'll understand why people need to be convinced. Because Caleb Williams, quarterback of the Chicago Bears, he's ranked as the quarterback 11. He's been running a little bit hot and cold, right? He's the QB8 on the year in total fantasy points with 5 QB1 performances and 3 top 5 finishes. The other 4 weeks, he was outside the quarterback 18, right? Minnesota, over their last 3 games, have allowed the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, allowing 5 straight quarterbacks to go over 16 fantasy points, including 3 of those quarterbacks to go over 19 fantasy points in 3 of their last 4 games. So this is a good spot here for Caleb Williams. This game is in a dome. There's no concerns of weather. Again, it's Minnesota and Chicago. It just feels like this game is going to be weird and have, a lot of points, potentially high scoring, back and forth nature to it. So yeah, this game can get very interesting very quickly. And so that's why on the other side of that, we're going to talk about Minnesota quarterback JJ McCarthy, ranked as the quarterback 15 on the week. Definitely a polarizing player for sure. Hasn't looked particularly good in the games, right? It looks ugly when JJ McCarthy plays, but somehow at times they win and he gets it done. A lot of that has to do with his rushing upside, at least 25 rushing yards or a touchdown in all 4 of his starts this season. And this week he gets the Chicago defense at home that has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. So good spot here for JJ McCarthy, good spot here for Caleb Williams. So that to me signals we might have a shootout here. You've got the weapons for each of these guys, I think, also in good spots here on the Chicago side. Rome Odunze, if he can go, which I think he will go, uh, you know, Minnesota has ranked 17th against, has allowed the 17th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers. So a decent spot. I also like Colston Loveland as a play here. Minnesota's allowed the 5th most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. The question is, DJ Moore, is he going to play? If he does or he doesn't, what does that mean for Luther Burden? I don't think we can start Luther Burden. I think we can stash Luther Burden, right? He's not a guy that I'm looking to I'm not looking to start him in this game. I need to see it first with Luther Burden. TJ Hawkinson, I guess you can play TJ Hawkinson. I mean, Chicago allowed the 10th most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. TJ Hawkinson hasn't particularly been great, but I would definitely start him if need be here. And then the running backs, what do you do about the running backs? If Aaron Jones plays, I think it's Aaron Jones's backfield. I thought Jordan Mason would take over that backfield. That has not happened. However, if Jordan If Aaron Jones can't go, then you feel good about Jordan Mason here, 17th most PPR points to opposing running backs. Chicago has allowed over their last 3 games. For the Bears side, DeAndre Swift, I think, is the primary running back to play. Kyle Monungai, I don't feel comfortable having to start him, but I will flex him if need be. I think he's like a low end RB3. Last week got 8 touches, scored a touchdown, so I think you felt good about the outcome. You felt decent, 8 PPR points, I think it was, because of that touchdown. But outside of that, there wasn't really a whole lot to feel like that you could depend on there. Justin Jefferson, people are wondering what to do with him. I think it's a halfway decent spot, right? Chicago allowed the 3rd most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. It's just, is JJ McCarthy going to be able to deliver the ball consistently to Justin Jefferson? So, yeah, I think you start Justin Jefferson. Somebody asked me the other day, would I start in a full PPR league? Pick 3, it was Rico Dowdle, Javonte Williams, and Justin Jefferson. And that one was tougher than I thought, because I think instinctually I just wanted to go Justin Jefferson, um, as one of the options, and then potentially Javante as the other one. But the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe I was like, I think you got to play the running backs. And especially his matchup, he was favored by a decent amount, so he doesn't need a whole ton of upside. So I said, hey, just take the safe floor with the running backs. So yeah, it gets interesting. Jordan Addison, you guys know how I feel about Jordan Addison. I always think he's a solid play. For what he is as a wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2, potentially even wide receiver 1 upside. All right, that's all we have on this game. I mean, I feel like I can go on and on about this game, just how good I think it'll be from a fantasy perspective. All right, let's move on to the next one. We'll talk about the LA Chargers traveling to Jacksonville to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. This game has a 43.5-point total. The Jags are 2.5-point home dogs here. I'm going to talk about Jacksonville wide receiver Parker Washington. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 31. He's seen a combined 26 targets over his last 3 games. The matchup isn't that great against the LA Chargers, but Washington, who's seen at least 7 targets over his last 3, should continue to have a role in the offense. We'll see if Brian Thomas Jr. returns to the lineup this week. Did seem to return to practice, but did not seem particularly, healthy. Seemed like he was laboring still a little bit. So I expect Parker Washington to be involved, as well as new addition Jacoby Myers. But I would still have Parker Washington above Jacoby Myers at this point in time. In terms of the matchups, right, on the LA Chargers side, I think they are in a good spot, right? I love Justin Herbert this week. Jacksonville, 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. I think Kamani Vidal, you continue to play him. The wide receivers, 12th most PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers, Jacksonville has. So Lad McConkey in play. Keenan Allen, I think you can play him, but there's not going to be a ton of upside there. And then Quentin Johnston, I mean, the range of outcomes there, you can get 8 points or you can get 18 points, right? So, but I would play Quentin Johnston in a pinch, right? I think you can flex him. Just given the matchup here. The weather is supposed to be good in this game, so that's great. And then Aronde Gadsden II, he is expected to play, right? He returned to practice. It was a bruised quad, so it was more about like pain management and whatnot. But the matchup here, fantastic. 2nd most PPR points allowed to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. So it's a great spot here for Gadsden. So, going to continue to roll him out there. Regardless of what's going on there. Also, to all my Gadsden managers, because I know y'all listening are Gadsden managers because you've been listening or watching. But Gadsden is on bye next week, so we got to make some arrangements there, right? So find some other options if you can. And then on the Jacksonville side, there's not really anybody I'm excited to play, right? This LA Chargers defense, 32nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 3 games. 31st against running backs, 31st against wide receivers, 28th against tight ends, right? So it really just comes down to Parker Washington and maybe Jacoby Myers, maybe, right? But yeah, that's really it. Travis Etienne, I think you hold your nose and you play him as a running back, 2 borderline running back 3, but that's really it. All right, let's move on to the next matchup. Let's talk Atlanta Falcons taking on the Carolina Panthers. Game sits here at 42.5. The Falcons are 3.5-point home favorites. And I'm going with Tyler Algier here of the Atlanta Falcons. He's the expert consensus PPR running back 35. Obviously, we all know how frustrating it has been for Bijan managers to watch Algier punch in goal line touchdowns. And I'm sorry, but I think that's going to continue throughout the season, right? I mean, Raheem Morris got a lot of flack for it, but he's said Algier is one of the more underrated. He's the most underrated superstar on our team. I get it. People hate having to watch Algier punch in goal line touchdowns over the more highly drafted Bijan Robinson. But I also think that football teams, they choose their personnel. They put guys in particular roles, and they want to also reward guys, right? Like Algier, he may not be something completely meaningful to us from a fantasy, from a fantasy perspective, but he probably means a lot to that coaching staff, probably means a lot to that football team, right? He's a guy, has, been in the league for 4 years, ran for 1,000 yards as a rookie, and he's ceded, his job to Bijan Robinson, right? And I think the team loves the way he runs. There's probably a bunch of other stuff that he does from a leadership perspective for that team. So I think Algier was going to continue to be rewarded for doing, some of the dirty work. Also, if you watch this Atlanta offense, Algier is often lined up as the running back, right? They'll play Algier and Bijan on the field together quite a bit. I think Bijan is used more of like this space player, this joker, right? Where he's not really lined up as a receiver, but he's not really lined up in the backfield. He's kind of just like off to the side, like in space. So Algier ends up getting a lot of the traditional like running back carries, right? Anyway, I know I went on this whole Algier rant. It's just kind of a reminder of like, for me, um, I don't appreciate football because I love fantasy football. I appreciate fantasy football because I love football. Right. So if you call what I'm saying, what I mean by that is like, I love the football first and then the fantasy second. Right. So I'm not going to get all up in arms because Algier is stealing these like goal line carries from Bijan Robinson, right? We're acting. I feel like some of us in the community act as if this is like Carlos Washington or like Nathan Carter that's coming off like the practice squad to steal a touchdown from Bijan Robinson. Like, that's not what this is, right? This is just a flow of a football game. They see Algier as their like goal line back, yada yada yada, whatever, right? I'm gonna be done with this rant now. But anyway, Carolina over their last 3 games has allowed the 6th most PPR points to opposing running backs. And as home favorites, I like Algier to finish as an RB3 if you need help at the running back position this week. Again, goal line opportunity probably in play, whether we like it or not. From the Atlanta side, I did talk earlier in the week. I think you could play Michael Penix if you need to, but with only 2 teams on bye and one of those being Tyler Shuck, and the other one's Daniel Jones, I don't think you have to go to Michael Penix, right? Like, there's so many other quarterbacks I would go to before I get to a Michael Penix. But, if you're in a super flex league, I think you can get away with playing him. Totally fine. Drake London, obviously, you're going to start him. Bijan, you're going to definitely start him.
And then Kyle Pitts, I think you can get away with playing him. It was a crappy week for him last week, but of course it was because I made him my start of the week. So of course it was going to be a crappy week. But anyway, 14th most PPR points allowed to opposing tight ends Carolina has over their last 3 games. So Kyle Pitts could be in a halfway decent spot here. And then on the Carolina side, I say it every week, but I like Tedoroy McMillan. I do. So Atlanta, 13th most PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers. I like Tedoroy McMillan. It is what it is. On the Rico Dowdle, I think he's going to be forever on this injury report with that quad injury. Has Carolina had a bye yet? I don't think so. I don't think Carolina's had their bye yet. So maybe they'll use that as an opportunity to get healthy. But I think you play Rico Dowdle. Chuba Hubbard, basically unplayable. But I think you have to continue to hold him because he has that, right? He's got the same upside that a lot of these other insurance policy running backs have, right? So, all right, let's move on to the next game here. We'll talk the New York Giants going up against the Green Bay Packers. This game sits here at 44.5. The Giants are 7.5 point home dogs in their first game without head coach Brian Daboll. I'm going to lean on New York Giants running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. here. He's the expert consensus PPR running back 26. Now, Jameis Winston is starting, right? Jackson Dart in concussion protocol, not going to start, right? So I think there's not a whole lot to love on the New York Giants side, right? But Tracy's probably the most intriguing player to me. He saw a 63.6% running back rush share last week, which with Jackson Dart at quarterback, right, that translated to a team rush share of 46.7%. So what I mean by that is Jackson Dart runs quite a bit, right? I had said throw out a stat a couple weeks ago or last week that he, has led the NFL in design quarterback runs, right? So if you imagine that like the rushing attempts are a pie, right? Now, if only running backs were eating that pie, Tracy has a larger share, right? 63.6% of that pie compared to Devin Singletary. But now let's say you sit down the running backs and Jackson Dart to eat that pie. Well, now instead of 2/3 of the pie, Tracy's only getting half of the pie. He's getting less than half the pie because Jackson Dart's going to eat a lot of pie. But you throw Jameis Winston into the mix instead of Jackson Dart. Well, Jameis Winston, he might have a little bit of pie, but he's not going to have that much pie, right? Tyrone Tracy, what that means, more pie for him, right? So, again, while Winston is starting, he likes to boogie a little bit. Most of that is from scrambling, not via design quarterback runs. So he's not going to be a part of the run game, which means a more traditional rushing attack here for Tyrone Tracy. Matchup is middle of the road here, 15th most PPR points to opposing running backs Green Bay has allowed over their last 3 games. And we also know he's going to be involved a little bit as a receiver as well. Now, on the Packers side, I really feel like this is a big Josh Jacobs game against the Giants. Most PPR points allowed to opposing running backs over their last 3 games. At quarterback, they've allowed the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So Jordan Love, I think it's a decent spot. I don't particularly love his weapons in this one, but I think he gets it done. But I think there's other options you could go to at quarterback. But in a super flex league, I think you start Jordan Love. I probably have him. I think I have him in the top 15 right now of my quarterback rankings. So, good spot, not great spot. I think personally, Christian Watson, I think is a flex play at best this week. I do think they established the rushing attack here against the Giants. And then on the Giants side, is there anyone you really want to play? I mean, yes, Jameis is fun. It's a fun story. I'm not playing Jameis Winston. I'm not going to. Unless I'm a super flex, then I'll consider playing Jameis Winston, but I'm really not No interest in playing Jameis Winston outside of that. Darius Slayton, could you play him? Yes, you could. Will I? No, personally, I won't. Wan'Dale Robinson, he's the one that scares me, right? Because Jameis Winston, he comes in, we're going to find out was it the offense? I mean, was it Jackson targeting Wan'Dale Robinson? Right. Obviously, we know that there had all the injuries and whatnot, but we know Jameis likes to let it rip. He likes to throw it down the field. Right. Is Wan'Dale going to get a lot of those same targets? Right. Is he going to get those targets in the short area of the field? Right. So those are things I'm curious to see. I think you can play Wan'Dale in a pinch, but he's one of the guys that when I was looking at this, I kind of, got scared a little bit. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We've got the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. This game has a 50.5-point total. The Steelers are 5.5-point home favorites here. I'm going with Pittsburgh tight end Pat Freiermuth. He's the expert consensus PPR tight end 22. Freiermuth has scored 3 touchdowns over his last 4 games, has at least 3 catches in each of those games. He's participated on at least 50% of the routes in 3 of his last 4 games. And by the way, did I mention he's playing against Cincinnati? Yes, that's Cincinnati, the one that allows the most PPR points per game to opposing tight ends since what feels like forever, right? I could always say the last 3 weeks, I could say on the season, it almost feels like even going back to the end of last year, Cincinnati has not been able to stop an opposing team's tight end. And plus, the last time he played against them, that was back in week 7, 111 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, Pat Freiermuth, I think if you need a tight end, right? We talked about Dalton Schultz, you're missing him. You could definitely pivot to a Pat Freiermuth, right? So definitely a good spot for him. Staying in this game, we talked about the quarterbacks, right? The icy hot bowl between Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco. Both guys. I actually didn't bring up Joe Flacco in the waiver show, which shame on me. I think he was coming off bye, so I kind of missed that. And he was rostered in a lot of my leagues, so I just missed it when I was going through the waivers. But think about that. People were holding Joe Flacco through the bye. That's crazy, man. That's great. Joe Flacco, man, what you mean for us in fantasy right now in the year 2025 when you were drafted in 2008. Fantastic stuff here that you're getting held through a bye week by a lot of managers. Because they're sharp. They're sharp. Also, Joe Burrow coming back potentially. Missed that one in the waiver show. And it's not even because I missed it, because I didn't see it. I saw it. I was like, oh, Joe Burrow's coming back. Went to go pick him up in a couple fantasy leagues. Did write about him in the cheat sheet, though. He was listed as a stash. I felt bad for leaving him out of the waiver show, but interesting to see what happens if Joe Burrow does make it back. Cincinnati keep winning. Part of me almost wants to just keep seeing Joe Flacco do this thing, because Joe Flacco, he's hot. He's in it right now. Joe Burrow comes back, is there going to be an acclimation period? He's going to start slow and bogs down the whole offense. That's a whole nother thing. But I do like Joe Flacco this week, like Aaron Rodgers this week, right? Cincinnati has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games here. So definitely a good spot here for Aaron Rodgers. DK Metcalf, I think you got to hold your nose and play him. 21st most PPR points against the opposing wide receivers at Cincinnati. So not great, but I think you just play him, right? Luckily, hopefully, you were tapped into that cheat sheet. We had DK Metcalf as a sell, I think, back after they left London. So, yeah. Jaylen Warren, hopefully you bought him because we had him as a buy a few weeks back. This is one of the reasons why this matchup against Cincinnati. Cincinnati has allowed the second most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games. And then obviously the tight end position, which we talked about. And then Pittsburgh, defensively, 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. second most to opposing wide receivers. So you feel really good about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in this spot. And then eighth most to opposing tight ends. Now, Cincinnati, they don't use the tight end. It's like, you just wonder, does Cincinnati know that the tight end exists? Because they don't defend one and then they don't really use one on offense, right? But I joke. Noah Fant, solid option, right? Like the definition of a floor play here. He's like in the Greg Dulcich category of like you wake up on Sunday and you're like, shoot, I don't have a tight end. Like I need somebody this week. Juwan Johnson's on by. Tyler Warren's on by. I really need to get a tight end this week. Somebody who's just gonna spot start for a week and I'll just move on, right? So in my mind, those guys are like Pat Fryermuth, Greg Dulcich, Noah Fant, right? Or Colston Loveland. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's all we have in this game. I mean, Chase Brown, you're gonna play him. Pittsburgh, 25th most PPR points to opposing running backs over the last 3 games, but I think you play him. And then that's it in this game. All right, let's talk the LA Rams against the Seattle Seahawks. LA Rams are 2.5-point home favorites. The total sits here at 48.5. And we're going to go back to an oldie but a goodie, Seattle quarterback Sam Darnold. He's the expert consensus PPR quarterback 16. All right, so Darnold didn't come through for us last week in week 10. Had, again, 3 turnovers, the weird game. Seattle dominated the entirety of it. It was just a mess from a fantasy perspective for Darnold. But he's got a more competitive game here on deck against the LA Rams defense that has allowed an average of 19.3 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Now, that translates to like the 13th best matchup for opposing quarterbacks. So pretty good matchup there. And again, more competitive game. I think there's some back and forth nature to it. I like Darnold to have a much better outing this week than he did last week. Also, we've got a revenge game for Cooper Kupp. Does that mean I'm going to play Cooper Kupp? No, not really. But I will play JSN, though. Love me some Jackson Smith-Njigba. How could you not? I think regardless of the matchup, I mean, the matchup's actually pretty good. 10th most PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games, right? 10th most PPR points to opposing tight ends, right? So I think this is a good tight end streaming week, right? Elijah Arroyo, another guy you could probably stream. AJ Barner's been dealing with an injury there, so he's been somewhat limited. So Elijah Arroyo would probably be the guy I would go to in that instance. On the Rams side, right? I mean, Matthew Stafford, another great spot for him. At running back, I guess the question begs, which Seattle running back do you play, right? And every week I say an answer, and it turns out to be the wrong answer. But I think if you got both of them, like separately, you can probably get away with playing both of them separately. But you'll probably be disappointed with the one that you play, right? And I'm not going to tell you to start. I would start RJ Harvey over both of those guys, right? I don't feel confidently about the roles for either one of the Seattle Seahawks over the role for an RJ Harvey. So that's a guy that I would go with ahead of these Seattle running backs. But staying, back to the Rams side, right? Puka Nacua, obviously, in your lineup. Devontae Adams has been dealing with that oblique injury. He could have potentially returned last week, according to Sean McVay. But if you've been listening to the show for a while, or you've just been paying attention to quarterback or head coaches and their press conferences and how they speak about injuries, Sean McVay is a certified liar. So I will not believe that Devontae Adams is playing until I get the Yahoo alert that he went from questionable to healthy, right? Or he's off the injury report or whatever. But I'll be on the lookout for that. Hopefully we get the Sunday morning, the notification saying that, he's healthy and ready to go from Ian Rappaport, who are expected to play. And then Kyron Williams, obviously, you're going to play. Blake Corum, you continue to stash him. And then Terrence Ferguson, I'm not going to start him in fantasy, but I'm starting him in a dynasty league because Juwan Johnson's on bye. But he's an interesting player to keep an eye on. All right, let's move on to the next matchup here. Let's talk the Arizona Cardinals against the San Francisco 49ers. The Cardinals are home 3-point dogs. The total sits here 48.5. And let's talk Arizona quarterback Jacoby Brissett. He's the expert consensus PPR quarterback 18. Brissett has been very good, right? No sugarcoating that. No less than 19 fantasy points in any of his 4 starts this season. And now against the San Francisco defense that's allowed an average of 26 plus fantasy points over their last 3 games to opposing quarterbacks, including 3 straight games of at least 21 fantasy points, right? So you've got a quarterback on one end in Brissett that has scored no less than 19 fantasy points. You've got a matchup where over their last 3 games, the San Francisco defense has allowed no less than 21 fantasy points. Something's going to give, right? Or I guess nothing's got to give. I guess they're both going to give in the same direction because that's what it's giving. So Jacoby Brissett, you can start him. I have no issues with that. I mean, Superflex, he's probably picked up to. I was thinking back to KJ's question, but yeah, I would even start Brissett over Baker Mayfield. Hot take, but I would do it. All right. Staying in this game, let's talk San Francisco wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. He is the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 82. And no, that's not a typo because my man Pearsall is coming back off of injury, and I think he's going to play. So that's why I'm free candy, free game here with Ricky Pearsall. I'm going to take it. So obviously he's missed the last 6 games due to a knee injury. Prior to that injury, Pearsall looked good for the 49ers, had 2 games where he's seen at least 54% of the team air yard share, right? No other 49ers wide receiver has seen more than 40.6% in any game this season. He is the clear deep threat in this offense. And once he's back, I think he should step into this role as the top pass catcher for the 49ers, starting hopefully this week against an Arizona defense. It's allowed the 14th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. Right. In this week's cheat sheet, we did not have a sell. Instead we had 2 buys. Ricky Pearsall was the second buy. Right. He's a guy that we were on early in terms of making him starts of the week out the gate, just because of how he was getting utilized, and he came through back then as well. And then unfortunately he got injured. But I think, he's a guy that I've been wanting to buy in my fantasy leagues, right? But I was waiting for him to start ramping up, him start getting healthy. In even some leagues he'd been dropped because of, they don't have an IR spot, and, there was no clear timeline on when he would return, but it looks like he's going to play this week. So yeah, I love me some Ricky Pearsall. So if you got an opportunity to get him, buy him low on the cheap, I would totally make a move to make that happen. Staying in this game, right? Arizona running back. I think that's Amari DiMercado. I don't know if Trey Benson, is he real? Does he exist? Right? I have no idea. But Amari DiMercado, he does. He's very real. So I think you can play him in this matchup here. He looks like he has the hot hand, right? And Jonathan Gannon, that's all he's giving us is, I'm going to play the hot hand. I'm going to play the hot hand. Well, Amari DiMercado seems like the hottest hand right now. So they can play him. No Marvin Harrison Jr. He had appendicitis or an appendectomy, something like that. Anyway, no Marvin Harrison Jr., so Michael Wilson would step in as the top option at the wide receiver position, right? The matchup here pretty good, 4th most PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers, but we know what this means. It's going to be the Trey McBride show. Trey McBride for like a 40% target share. I also think Elijah Higgins, who is the backup tight end for Arizona, I think he's gonna get involved as well. He's been involved the last few weeks. I think he's got like three targets in each of his last like 3 games. And now with no Marvin Harrison Jr., I think you'll see a lot more Elijah Higgins on the field alongside Trey McBride. So I think you can see him get involved. But I think that's more of like a DFS, possibly even a betting thing there with Elijah Higgins. Anything else in this game? Obviously, you're going to start CMC. You're going to start George Kittle. I talked crap about George Kittle last week, and then look what happens. So Yeah, I think that's really it on that side. Moving on to the next game here, we've got the Denver Broncos against the Kansas City Chiefs. Broncos are 3.5-point home dogs here. The total sits here at 44.5. Now, Denver running back RJ Harvey is my guy this week. Expert consensus PPR running back 24. This game feels so gross. Both teams rank pretty well against all the positions, but with Dobbins expected to miss this week's game, Harvey steps into a larger role. Notice I didn't say lead role, but a larger role. In weeks 8 and 9, he scored a combined 40 PPR points on 15 total touches, right? So if he can get close to double digits here this weekend, I think you feel pretty good about the outcome from a fantasy perspective with Harvey. But outside of that, I don't know, is there anyone I really want to play? I mean, I think you play Mahomes. You probably play, play Rashee Rice. You play Travis Kelce. But, I mean, Kareem Hunt, I think you can play, obviously, because of, the attachment to the offense, and hopefully he gets in the end zone. I'm not really excited to play anybody, right? Even our guy, Troy Franklin, I don't really want to play him. I will if I have to. But I don't. I'm looking for other options. Kansas City over their last 3 games, 32nd against the wide receiver position, 32nd most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. Not a lot. So not really anyone I'm excited to play. Bo Nix, no, not really excited to play him either. So moving on to the next game, let's talk the Cleveland Browns against the Baltimore Ravens. The Browns are 8.5-point dogs. The total sits here at 41.5. And I'm going to go Baltimore wide receiver Zay Flowers. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 20. This one was tough, right? There's not any player I'm really excited about in this matchup, but I've been adamant all year about sticking with Zay Flowers. He's seen a 27% target share over his last 3 games, leading to an average of 6.7 targets per game. And I think he's just too good of a football player to not be in lineups this week, or not be in lineups every week, rather. Cleveland 26 most PPR points to opposing wide receivers, but somebody's going to have to move the ball, right? And I think Zay Flowers is going to be a part of that consistently. Outside of that, I think it's just your usual suspects like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Quinshon Judkins. I'm not trusting Jerry Jeudy this week. Baltimore has been a lot better, right, defensively the last couple of weeks. 6th most PPR points allowed to wide receivers, though, over the last 3 games. And Dillon Gabriel, that would require him to consistently hit Jerry Jeudy with the football in the hands. So if I have to rely on that, I'd rather try not breathing for 4 hours. Anyway, Mark Andrews, I think you can play him. You can play the tight ends, or I think you play Harold Fannin. I don't think you can play David Njoku, but you can play Harold Fannin because of the volume. And that's really it from this game. Moving on to the next game, we've got the Detroit Lions against the Philadelphia Eagles. This game sits here at 48.5. The Eagles are 1.5-point home favorites. And I'm going with Detroit Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 30. Don't look now, but back-to-back weeks with a touchdown for JMO. The wide receiver 1 overall last week after finishing as the wide receiver 19 the week prior. And the best part about last week is Dan Campbell took over play calling duties last week. And if you ever hear Dan Campbell talk about Jameson Williams, right, there's the account Coach Speak Index. They clip up press conferences from coaches, and they use models to basically decipher what the coach is actually trying to say, right, through the Coach Speak. And it's very clear and evident that Dan Campbell loves Jameson Williams, or JMO, as he likes to call him, right? He absolutely loves him. And he showed that through his play calling last week because, Jameson Williams was involved early and often. And with Dan Campbell continuing to call plays, I think we're going to continue to see JMO involved in that offense. So obviously, you're going to play your Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is a, Jared Goff. I'm not running to play him. I'll play him in Superflex, but I'm not running to play him. This is a week where I'll eat the pancakes without the syrup. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're going to play. Jahmyr Gibbs, you're going to play. David Montgomery, I can get away without playing David Montgomery. I mean, I will play him as a running back 3. But maybe borderline running back 2, right? But it's really just going to be like, does he score a touchdown? And I hate playing that game. On the Philly side, question, right? The big question is, do you play AJ Brown? After he says, if you have him in fantasy, don't play him, right? Get rid of him. Get rid of me, I think is what he said. I think you play him. I'm just gonna say I think you play him, right? I do have him in my top 24 of wide receivers this week. But I think you play him. All right, Devontae Smith, he's been hot. I think you play him, and that's the thing, right? It's not like nobody in the passing attack is doing anything, right? Devontae Smith, he's been playing well. Dallas Goedert, he gets his opportunities every now and then. So I think about it as a pendulum, right? We talked about this weeks ago with Ladd McConkey, right? It's a pendulum, right? You've got players, getting these targets, right? And especially when you have an offense with 2 receiving options, and it's swung so far right now in the direction of Devontae Smith, right? 40% target share over his last 3 games. It's got to swing back in the other direction for AJ Brown, right? And so that is what I'm leaning on here, right? Is that it swings back in the other direction for AJ Brown. Do you play Saquon Barkley? 32nd most fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Detroit is. Yes, you play Saquon Barkley. Do you play Jalen Hurts? I think you got to play Jalen Hurts, right? I don't love the idea of playing Jalen Hurts, but I think you got to play Jalen Hurts. All right, let's move off of this game and on to the next one. We've got the Monday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys traveling to Las Vegas to take on the Las Vegas Raiders. This game sits here at 50.5-point total. I think this, let's see. I think this was the highest. This is one of the highest totals on the week, along with Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. This spread a little bit tighter though. Dallas 3.5-point favorites on the road here, right? So, Las Vegas wide receiver Trey Tucker, expert consensus PPR wide receiver 34. Let's get back to touting our guy, Trey Tucker. With Jacoby Myers traded, we should expect more opportunities here for Tucker going forward. That didn't come to fruition last week, but I feel like that was driven by matchup, right? If you heard me, I don't really love the Denver defense, or I don't love going up against the Denver defense. Last week, I think probably was a week that you could have been more willing to, with the defense being without Surtain. But this week, though, they played Dallas, who've allowed the 9th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers. So Trey Tucker, I think, is in play just because of the matchup. Don't know what's going on with Geno Smith. I know he, was dealing with a knee injury. I don't know if he's going to play. It's been pretty quiet out of there. And I'm not saying I don't know if he's going to play, because I think it's in doubt. I say I don't know if he's going to play because I haven't honestly been checking on the status of Geno Smith. But Geno Smith, Kenny Pickett, I think either way, Trey Tucker's in play. You're obviously going to play Brock Bowers. Let's see. I don't see anything about Geno Smith. Good news on the injury report. So Geno Smith is going to play. So, Brock Bowers, you're obviously going to play him. And then Ashton Jeanty, you're going to play him as well. On the Dallas side, I think you start all your Cowboys, right? You're starting Dak Prescott. You're starting Javonte Williams. You're starting CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. Jake Ferguson, it's been not great for him. The matchup's not great for him, but I think you play him just based off the possibility that he may catch a touchdown, maybe 2. I think that's just the only reason to continue to play him right now. But all right, let's get to that money time. Those starts of the week. We're running a little over today, so I guess it's no more Tyler Algier rants for me anymore. But week 10 starts the week. Not a great week, man. Not a great week, right? We had Jackson Dart finishes the QB3, which pretty much in line with what I said, right? I think he was a top 8 quarterback with top 3 upside. He did that. And that was after not after the concussion, but with him suffering a concussion and having to miss the rest of that game. Derrick Henry, running back 22. We wanted well more than that. AJ Brown, that was the biggest whiff of the week, probably. Wide receiver 67, 2.3 fantasy points, PPR points, just not good enough from me or AJ Brown here. And then Kyle Pitts, I think the targets were there. It just didn't hit. So tight end 24 on the week. So look, you know how I feel. I want these to hit more than anybody. Because I really do want you guys to win, right? So I feel bad when I miss on these starts of the week, but and it's not been a good 2 weeks. All right, I think we've hit on one of these guys in the last 2 weeks, right? So, and that was Jackson Dart. So, yeah, we're going to get better, right? We're gonna lock in, focus up, and we'll get this thing going, right? So we'll get it back on track, starting with LA Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Over the last 4 weeks, right, Herbert ranks as the QB3 in fantasy points per game, with 3 outings of 25 or more fantasy points during that span. And he's taken on a Jacksonville defense that over their last 3 games has allowed the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, allowing 3 straight quarterbacks to go over 26 fantasy points. In fact, over the last 5 games, they've allowed no less than 20 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and have allowed 4 of those quarterbacks to go over 26 fantasy points. Needless to say, you need to start Justin Herbert with supreme confidence this week. Moving on to the running back position, let's go Josh Jacobs. I teased it before, but Josh Jacobs going up against the New York Giants. Since week 4, Jacobs is the RB3 in PPR points per game, behind only Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey, averaging 22.6 PPR points per game. And now with injuries at pass catchers to obviously Jaden Reed and not Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, and now even Romeo Doubs, and then obviously they lost Tucker Kraft. I expect Green Bay to lean on their workhorse running back this week. Jacobs has seen 76% of the running back rush share this season. He's second behind only Jonathan Taylor and carries inside the 5-yard line with 13. And he's only one of 2 players in the NFL to see 100% of the team's carries inside the 5-yard line. Not to mention the matchup here, as the New York Giants have allowed the most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games here. So Josh Jacobs, definitely a guy that you want in your fantasy lineups this week. Obviously, you want him in your fantasy lineups, but expect him to not just be the workhorse for the Green Bay Packers, but be the workhorse for your fantasy team this week. Moving on to the wide receiver start of the week. You guessed it. If it wasn't Achane, then it was Waddle. So Miami wide receiver Jalen Waddle going up against the Washington Commanders since week 5 when Miami moved on without the injured Tyreek Hill. Waddle has been the wide receiver 14 in PPR points per game, scoring at least 14 PPR points in all but 1 game since week 5. And this week he gets a Washington defense that's allowed the most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. So definitely love the spot for Waddle this week. Expecting a big week out of Jalen Waddle. And for my tight end start of the week, I'm going with a confident start of the week, right? Calling my shot here on Chicago tight end Colston Loveland going against the Minnesota Vikings. Loveland was back to sharing his role with Cole Kmet last week, but he was still involved in the offense. And with DJ Moore, injured, dealing with shoulder injury, also being ineffective, and the tight end position being a weakness for Minnesota over their last 5 games, they've allowed 5 opposing tight ends to score a touchdown and go over double-digit PPR points. So if Loveland can continue to ascend and see more opportunities in this offense this week, then he could be prime for a breakout game here, given the matchup. All right, y'all. That was my starts of the week. And so I appreciate all of y'all for listening, right? Again, we're getting down to the wire here, right? So this is where those weekly lineup calls, matchup plays, flex decisions, they're really going to start to define our season or, make or break our season here. So trust your process, right? Stay active, play the matchups, give you the best shot to win. If you enjoyed, this stream right here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications so you don't miss another episode, right? Now, again, if you're watching, if you're listening to this and you're not a member of the Patreon, go over to patreon.com/FFDX. You'll get the weekly cheat sheet every Tuesday evening, 100% free. Doesn't cost a thing. And right now, the FFDX supporter tier, which is typically $1 a month, is 100% free. Everything that tier gets, everyone is going to have access to it up through the end of Thanksgiving weekend, right? So go over there, check it out, check out what we have to offer. And the best part is, if you don't like any of it, you can walk away, no questions asked, because it's not going to cost you a thing, right? But check it out. The waiver wire article, expanded rankings, Sunday Q&A. Look, jump in for the Sunday Q&A, right? See how it goes. But yeah, appreciate y'all. Appreciate everyone who tuned in live, everyone who's listening on podcast. And I'm sorry again for not getting the Week 10 show out in podcast. Like I said, that it was stuck in the drafts, so I apologize for that. Didn't actually get it out. So, but appreciate y'all for rocking with me as always. Good luck this weekend in your Week 11 matchups. Go get those wins, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.